Hello everyone. Today let's talk about the digital certificate, PKI and HTTPS. Let's first talk about the public key infrastructure or PKI. PKI is basically the infrastructure that is used to create, maintain, and distribute and revoke the digital certificates of the subjects, or we call it servers. And based on this infrastructure, it can be used to manage the public key encryption in a correct way. The critical components of PKI includes the certificate authority or CA, the registration authority RA, the certificate revocation list CRL, and subjects and clients. So we're going to talk about the details in the next few slides. The goal of the PKI is firstly to ensure the authenticity of the public key of the subject, and based on that, it can be helpful to facilitate the secure transfer of the information for the Internet activities, such as e-commerce, Internet banking, and confidential email. Let's see how the all components in the public key infrastructure collaborate with each other to protect the security of the Internet. Supposedly a subject or a web server want to set up a server and to generate digital certificates. What he needs to do is that he will collect all his information, including his host name, the owner of the company, the name of the company, and most importantly, the public key that he is owning, and collect everything and send it to the RA, which is Registration Authority. So as we said, this needs to include the name of the subject and some other informations, and most importantly, the public key of the subject, and send everything to Registration Authority. Registration Authority will audit all the information that the subject has provided, and if all the information prove to be correct, then the Registration Authority will send a request to the Certificate Authority to ask him to generate a certificate for the subject. And once the certificate has generated, the certificate is going to send back to the subject. And this is digital certificate. So what this digital certificate contains is the public key of the subject, the name of the subject, and other informations. So everything are signed with a private key of the CA. As a result, nobody can create this digital certificate except for the CA. And when subject receive the digital certificate, the subject will store the digital certificate in his place until the client wants to visit the subject. Supposedly a client uses his web browser, wants to visit the web server. What he does is that he will send a request to ask for the digital certificate of the subject. And upon receiving the request, the subject will return the digital certificate to the client. And since the digital certificate is signed by the CA, which is a trusted party, the client can verify if the digital certificate is authenticated. If the digital certificate is authenticated, then the client believes that he is actually talking to the real subject other than some fake website. Then he can start the communication. This is how the public key infrastructure and the digital certificate works. So another important information in the digital certificate includes expiration time, include the expiration time. Whenever the current time expires, the expiration time, the digital certificate become no longer valid. Then the subject needs to either reapply and get another digital certificate, or he won't be able to be trusted by the client. But there's one exception, which is certificate revocation list. As we can see that the expiration time in this digital certificate is a fixed value. What if some of the security already have been compromised before the expiration time? Then what? Then when the CE finds this, he needs to notify all the clients that the digital certificate that he is issuing earlier no longer work. Then what he does is that he will add the digital certificate to the CRL, or the certificate revocation list. So whenever the client receives the digital certificate, he first needs to check whether the digital certificate is stored in the CRL. If this is listed in the CRL, then that means the digital certificate is revoked. Then the client will no longer believe in this digital certificate. If the digital certificate is not stored in the CRL, then the client go ahead to verify the authenticity of the digital certificate, and if the verification has passed, then he can trust the subject or the web server. Let's take a look at a concrete example about how does a digital certificate generated. Suppose there's an organization called Wikimedia that he wants to generate digital certificate for himself. He provides all his information to the RA, which is registration authority, including the Mario Rossi, his name, and organization name, Wikimedia, and his address, and maybe his company, and maybe his country, and most importantly, his public key. And he submits all the information to RA, and RA verify all his information, and then if all the information is valid, he will send a request to the certificate authority or CA. CA is going to generate a digital certificate for himself by signing all the information with his private key and attach the digital signature with all the information that he provided. And the two components, putting them together, is called a digital certificate. So if we mark it, let's say all the information that's provided by the company Wikimedia, let's see, we call it all the information we mark it as M, then the digital signature is basically generated as creating the signature by using the CA's private key. Let's mark it as K private of CA and sign the information with the private key of the CA, and it will generate the digital signature. And the whole digital signature will be sent back to Mario Rossi. And whenever any website, any browser want to visit his website, he will send back the digital certificate to the browser, and the browser will be able to verify the correctness of his information. And if the verification has passed, then the browser will trust the public key that he claims. You may also notice that there's another information added to this certificate, which is validity or the expiration time. So you can see that in this example, this digital certificate is valid from 1997 to 2047. So let's take a look at one concrete example on the Wikipedia. Let's say that supposedly when you visit such website on your browser, this is actually a real website on Wikipedia, and you will notice that it is using the HTTPS protocol, and you will also notice there's a padlock icon on the left hand side of the URL. And when you click this padlock, Then you will see a dialog indicating all the informations here, which is the digital certificate. So you can see that in the digital certificate, it has the real information. For example, it has the common name, the organization name, it has a common name, the organization name, and it has a serial number, and it also have expiration time, validity time. And when you click this detail tab, and you can see another very important information, which is a public key, of this subject or of this website. So this is the concrete information about the public key. As you can see, the public key is represented as a hex number. Now let's take a look at how does HTTPS to leverage the digital certificate to enforce a secure communication channel. Suppose that the web server already obtained a digital certificate from the CA, and the digital certificate includes all his basic information, and most importantly, his public key. We mark it as KPubS. And notice that before the web server obtained the digital certificate, he will generate a pair of asymmetric encryption key, including his public key KPubS and the private key KPrivateS. And then the digital certificate he obtained is going to certify the correctness of his public key KPubS. So that's why the KPubS appears in the digital certificate. And the KPrivateS is a private key that is only known by the web server. So suppose this digital certificate is certified by the CA, that means the information is basically signed by the private key of the CA. The information that is signed includes the KPubS or the public key of the server. So the CA actually is going to broadcast his public key to all the parties, including any web browser. So then the web browser wants to visit the web server supposed to know the public key of the CA. Now let's take a look at how the HTTPS protocol works. The web browser first is going to send out, in order to visit the web server, he first is going to send out all the supported symmetric encryption or asymmetric encryption ciphers and supported hash functions to the web server. And the web server will pick the cipher algorithm and hash functions that he can use, that he can use, and send back the cipher and hash function back to the web browser. Then at this time, the web browser and the web server will use the same cipher algorithm and hash function. So at the same time, when the web server send back the chosen cipher and hash function, the web server also send back the certificate, the digital certificate. So when the web browser receives the digital certificate, since he knows the public key of the CE, he can verify the content inside of the digital certificate, especially the public key of the server. So what he does is that he will, since the digital certificate includes the digital signature that is encrypted or signed by the private key of the CA, then the web browser is going to decrypt this digital signature by using the public key of the CA, and he's gonna put the signature information here, private of the CA and KPubS. Then we know that for any message M, if we encrypt or signed by one of the private key and we decrypt with the corresponding public key, and we should be able to restore the message M. Then if the private key of C and public key of the C, they belongs to one pair of the asymmetric encryption, then this operation should be able to help us to restore back the key of the public as public key of the server, the public key of the server. Then the web browser is going to compare the public key of the server that he generated against the public key of the server that is claimed in the digital certificate. If the two public key is the same, then the web browser believes that the public key of the server claimed in the digital certificate should be the correct public key and trust it. Then he can assume that if he encrypts any information with this public key, then the information should be able to decrypt it and only be able to decrypt it by the web server. So then here comes the step 5 to generate the shared secret key. So the web browser is going to generate a pre-master key which is a random number generated by the web browser, and the web browser is going to encrypt this pre-master key with the public key of the server, And we know that for any of the message M, if this is encrypted by the public key and we decrypt it by its corresponding private key again, and we should be able to restore back the message M. Then when this message transmitted to the web server, then the web server will be able to decrypt the message with the private key of the server, since he is the only person who has the private key of the server. He decrypted with the private key of the server. This is the pre-master key. And then he will be able to restore the pre-master key. Then at this time, the two parties, the web server and the web browser, they are sharing the same pre-master key. And it is important to know that during the whole procedure, the pre-master key never appeared in plain text within the communication channel. It is always encrypted. So then at this time, I'm going to remove this part. So then at this time, we know that the two parties, they are sharing the same pre-master key, and then they are sharing the same algorithm to generate the encryption key, let's say K, from the pre-master key. Like the two parties, they are generating the same encryption key. Then from this time on, they can encrypt their message with a symmetric encryption algorithm using the key K. Suppose that, for example, for the web browser, if they want to encrypt the message M with the encryption key K, then he can simply encrypt with the encryption key K, and when this message transmitted to the web server, the web server can decrypt it with the same key, and he will be able to restore the message M. So notice that any encryption before step 6 are all employing the asymmetric encryption. And after and including the step 6, all the information, whenever encrypted, are using the symmetric encryption algorithm.